It's May 4th, 2026, and right now the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is on station in the Arabian Sea. Guided missile destroyers peeling off, aircraft orbiting overhead, 15,000 American service members executing the first convoy escorts of Project Freedom. The mission is live right now. The strait is hotter than ever, and depending on who you believe, the opening shots have already been fired. Here's what Iranian state media is claiming this morning. 2 missiles struck the USS Abraham Lincoln at the southern entrance of the Strait of Hormuz after the vessel, quote, ignored repeated warnings to halt from their fast attack craft guys with AK-47s. But it's being reported that Iran did actually launch ballistic missiles. Fars News, that's the IRGC affiliated news outlet, amplified this, and within hours places like Al Azhar picked it up. Trans rhetoric machine was in full throttle at this point. Actually, you could say it was in full max afterburner for that shameless plug. Former IRGC commander and Supreme Leader Advisor Mohsen Razai declared that American forces will face a, quote, graveyard of carriers and troops in the strait. He called the U.S. a pirate nation. It's almost like the U.S. is a bit of a mirror for you, my friend. The IRGC also set a 30-day deadline to end the U.S. naval blockade, vowing to turn Hormuz into a deadly trap for American warships if the blockade doesn't end in 30 days. That's the Iranian claim. But here's what the U.S. said, and it came fast and it came simple. CENTCOM released this. They said, Iran's IRGC claims to have struck USS Abraham Lincoln with ballistic missiles. Lie. The Lincoln was not hit. The missiles launch didn't even come close. The Lincoln continues to launch aircraft in support of CENTCOM's relentless campaign to defend the American people by eliminating threats from the Iranian regime. But it looks like Iran did actually fire missiles. Meanwhile, F-18E and Fs blasting off of the deck. And not just that, we're talking EA-18G Growlers likely blasting off as well. And the EA-18G Growler, that's electronic attack fighter that can blast off of the USS Abraham Lincoln, go up there and use electronic detection, spoofing, all types of techniques to find out where those ballistic missiles were launched from, and then call in follow-on strikes from F-18FS, which are the 2-seat F-18s or F-35s from the U.S. Air Force, A-10s, F-15E, 100-plus aircraft that are involved in this freedom of navigation operation. And then speaking of Al Azhar kind of reiterating whatever the IRGC says, here's what they said. They said 2 missiles hit a U.S. frigate in the Strait of Hormuz after it ignored warnings from Iran's Navy to halt state media. Quote, the Army is saying, with the U.S. military saying no vessel was struck. You couldn't say the U.S. military quote first, huh? You had to go with the IRGC. We're not really surprised. And they went on to say, the reported attack comes after U.S. President Donald Trump announced a naval mission dubbed Project Freedom to guide stranded ships out of the Strait of Hormuz starting Monday. Well, that part seemed relatively true. Good job, Al Azhar. Al Jazeera, are you doing okay? And CENTCOM released this press release. U.S. military supports launch of Project Freedom in Strait of Hormuz news. U.S. Central Command forces will begin supporting Project Freedom May 4th to restore freedom of navigation to commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. The mission, directed by the President, will support merchant vessels seeking to freely transit through the essential international trade corridor. A quarter of the world's oil trade at sea and significant volumes of fuel and fertilizer products are transported through the strait. The quote goes on, our support for this defensive mission is essential to regional security and the global economy as we also maintain the naval blockade, said Admiral Brad Cooper, CENTCOM commander. And then check this out. U.S. military support to Project Freedom will include guided missile destroyers, over 100 land and sea-based aircraft, multi-domain unmanned platforms, don't sleep on those, and 15,000 service members. Things have gotten real with this new Project Freedom launching. So, as you can see, this kind of shows us that Iran's decisive warning towards Navy warships is roughly as intimidating as a strongly worded note slid from a prison cell to the guard saying, if you don't let me out, I'm going to break free. It's like, oh yeah, okay, sounds great. Good luck with that. But what exactly went down near Jask, that island right by the strait entrance to the Strait of Hormuz? And how have all these ships been stranded at this point, with Iran forcing them to not make the journey through the Strait of Hormuz? Well, a lot of it relies on Iran's proxy tactics, and that's what we're seeing right now. 15,000 U.S. service members, more than 100 land and sea-based aircraft, guided missile destroyers, and advanced drones are in there supporting this defensive mission to ensure that now we'll get some ships through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump added that any interference will be dealt with forcefully. Iran's response came within hours them launching those ballistic missiles, saying that they hit a U.S. Navy destroyer. Their Fars News does this. This is what they do. They're the propaganda arm, and they're the ones that are spouting the idea that they actually hit a U.S. carrier. But again, they're trying to gaslight their own people, mainly to try to keep everybody in line on the streets of Tran. They don't want an uprising. They don't want the people to rise up. They want to show strength and make it look like they're actually taking on the U.S. Navy, which is the main reason. And then the second reason is for them to try to convince Europe that the U.S. is losing and get more European nations on their side with their propaganda arm. Kind of like how we've seen Germany come out in support of the IRGC, also the UK and France. We know that the UK has a few things up their sleeve. They're shaving off a couple euros for every barrel that would go through the Strait of Hormuz before the blockade was in place. They were basically making billions, if not trillions, over years of doing an oil arbitrage with Brent crude futures based in London, taking a little premium off of every barrel of oil that passes through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's not surprising that the UK and the leadership in London is wanting that oil to flow, regardless of what the Iranian regime does. They're okay with the Iranian regime having ballistic missiles, Shahed drones, even likely a nuclear weapon, as long as they keep getting that sweet flow of arbitrage money that's coming from the Strait of Hormuz. And obviously, that's a very short-sighted tactic to try to keep lining their pockets when a radical regime is potentially getting a nuclear weapon. But it does make it clear how Iran has gotten a lot of these countries on their side, specifically with the UK, with that oil arbitrage, making them rich. And Iran's like, yeah, we'll make you rich. Just let us do whatever we want. But Iran's not nothing, and their naval playbook in the Strait of Hormuz is as asymmetric as it gets, because they obviously can't match the U.S. Navy conventionally, especially with 160 of their main warships being sunk. The IRGC swarms the area with fast attack boats, issues maps claiming control of the waterway with their little minefield right there. Yeah, we've got a minefield. Push all the ships up next to our coast. Oman is on the other side of the strait, and man's kind of like, yeah, we've been lazy for decades, not building any naval force or power projection, so they just let their territorial waters get mined by Iran and didn't step up and do anything. But now we're seeing these fresh threats that are designed to create ambiguity and hesitation. Iran wants to keep causing chaos as long as they possibly can until they get to a point where they think the U.S. will back off. But that kind of looks like a snowball's chance in hell of the U.S. leaving without getting the terms that they want. The anti-ship arsenal in Iran is real, though. The C-82 Noir, that's a Chinese-derived sea-skimming cruise missile with roughly a 100 nautical mile range. They've also got supposed ballistic missiles modified for maritime strikes, older HY-2 coastal systems, and they fire them in salvos, multiple at a time, from mobile launchers, shore batteries, or even from fast attack craft themselves. These are legitimate threats, so we can't dismiss them. This is why we need advanced drones in the area to track these different threats. Iran's anti-H ship missiles exist inside of an American kill chain at this point that starts detecting threats far beyond Iranian radar coverage. The Aegis Combat System, that's the Navy's integrated air and missile defense network on a single Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, can track over 100 targets simultaneously. So the Aegis system can talk to the F-35. The F-35 can be up overhead using its radar, as well as the Aegis system, to detect where these different missiles are launching from. Or if they're launching from fast attack craft, then you can task the targeting of those fast attack craft with the American kill chain in the region passing targeting coordinates to A-10s, F-15E, and F-35s. And then the EA-18G Growler, like we talked about, that persistent electronic attack aircraft up there in the sky, watching any of these radars turn on, that are trying to guide these anti-H ship missiles. That's going to be the name of the game for that EA-18G. So obviously Iran is causing pain in the global economy. They're bleeding the world and kind of bleeding themselves at the same time, looking like they're wanting to go down with the ship. And the centerpiece is the USS Abraham Lincoln, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered carrier confirmed on station in the Arabian Sea. She carries roughly 90 aircraft, including F-A-18E and FS, F-35s as well, and those EA-18G Growlers, teamed up with E-2D for airborne radar coverage out to more than 400 miles. Also MH-60 Seahawks for surface and sub-threats. But the Hormuz escort mission, the frontline platform, is the Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer. They've got last-ditch weapon systems on those called the Phelan Sea-Whiz, the close-in weapon system for you acronym lovers. A radar-guided 20mm Gatling gun that fires 4,500 rounds per minute and is entirely autonomous. It detects, tracks, and engages without a human even having to be in the loop. This is Gucci technology if we've ever seen it. Why does this stack matter for the Hormuz threat specifically, though? Because Iran's anti-H ship doctrine relies on salvo attacks from multiple vectors to overwhelm single-layer defenses. But the Aegis system has a vote. Bring in the Aegis. That's a network that answers with independent layers. Each one of them lethal, each one operating simultaneously. You have to defeat all of them if you want to get through that in seconds under fire. While FA-18s are already airborne above as well, teamed up with the missiles coming off of these destroyers that can target coastal launch sites for follow-on strikes. Iran's fast attack boat swarming U.S. destroyers in the Strait of Hormuz is a bit like showing up to a bazooka fight on a jet ski. Aggressive, loud, and fast, but it's all just going to end in one hell of an explosion. But the hardware here is only half the equation, because what's being played right now between Washington and Tehran is a strategic chess match involving oil markets, European pressure, ACT channel diplomacy through Pakistan, and a U.S. strike plan for all the different islands around the Strait of Hormuz that could have ballistic missiles that could be threatening ships, because the U.S. administration outright rejected Iran's supposed 14-point peace plan, and Trump said that Iran had not paid a big enough price for what they have done to humanity and the world over the last 47 years. Kind of sounds like a grudge. Kind of sounds like the gloves are about to come off. That language, though, it's deliberate. It's maximum pressure in public. Some diplomatic channels left open, but Tehran wants the blockade lifted before any new talks happen. Washington wants concessions first. Neither side is moving, so both are tightening the vice. Importantly, though, the U.S. has positioned its naval forces outside the Gulf and Strait itself, enforcing the blockade from the Arabian Sea, monitoring Iranian port traffic from distances without exposing ships to mines, or the IRGC's fast attack harassment inside the confined Gulf waters. Until now, with Project Freedom changing that geometry slightly, escorts pushing closer to the strait entrance, but the strike group holding back and having that massive amount of firepower that can strike down those ballistic missile launchers once Iran launches those protected by range, air cover, and sensor reach. European allies in the UK have floated alternative multinational missions to open the strait rather than back the US blockade directly. They don't want to back the U.S. blockade because, again, especially London, they want to preserve a relationship with Iran because they don't know exactly how this is going to play out. I'll tell you how it'll play out. Iran's not going to have a big say in the Strait of Hormuz when this is all done. But the UK is like, we've been making billions of dollars over the last few decades off of our oil arbitrage, off of the oil barrels coming through the Strait of Hormuz. So they're basically trying to tap along the U.S. as well and just see if they can get that sweet deal back once the crude starts flowing again through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's pretty obvious at this point that the UK and London are compromised by the amount of money they were making from the Brent oil crude futures that they were skimming off of every barrel going through the Strait of Hormuz. So it's pretty clear at this point they were basically bought by the mafia. The Iranian regime, which is essentially the mafia, bought off the UK with this deal, and ultimately the UK is compromised. But now let's talk about Jazz. There's a naval base there. It's Iran's southernmost facility near the Gulf of Oman, positioned precisely to project force into the strait entrance without having to transit it. It's the logical origin point for any Iranian anti-ship missile attempt against a convoy escort operating near the strait's southern mouth. So what could the U.S. do in a 4D chess scenario? Well, obviously Iran is going to launch Shahed drones. They're going to launch these ballistic missiles. So if the U.S. is able to have RQ-4 Global Hawks overhead tied into the F-35's radar, now the RQ-4s can team up with the F-35. They can decide where that radar is that's being used to target the ballistic missile or the Shahed drones launching themselves, potentially even having anti-drone technology on some drones that are up above the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, think about if the Anduril Fury or the AI Expat had the ability to be up over the Strait of Hormuz and basically create an aerial blockade for ballistic missiles for Shahed drones. More specifically, Shahed drones using advanced microwave technology that could be loaded on these advanced drones to strike down Shahed drones using microwave technology to keep the Shahed drones from hitting their Gulf partners' energy infrastructure. The U.S. detection sequence, it starts even before a missile clears the ridgeline at Jask. The E-2D Hawkeye AWACS, these advanced drones, all doing ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. These drones are essentially the Stage 5 Klinger of ISR. They're up there watching, you can't shake them, and they show up at times that you're like, oh, this is weird. I'm pretty sure I have a stalker. And this is all connected via Link 16. As the encrypted tactical data network that connects every U.S. platform in the area. Intercept solutions are computed before the missiles reach cruise altitude. This is why the U.S. Navy can have kinetic responses. The U.S. Navy can reach out and touch and intercept these anti-H ship missiles that are being launched. And that is mainly because of the Aegis system that can intercept inbound missiles with SM-6 and SM-2s. So obviously 100-plus aircraft up overhead. The tension in the Straits is higher than it's ever been before, with what it looks like Iran breaking the ceasefire, launching multiple ballistic missiles. So what do you think happens next with this asymmetric play from Iran going up against the U.S. Navy, potentially pushing further into the Strait of Hormuz? Do you think we see increased hostilities? Do you think we see the war kick back off here in the next few days? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Would love to hear what you have to say. Then go ahead and follow me on X, follow me on Instagram. I'm posting there pretty much every day. And then click the link in the description. Consider joining the Max Ready Room. That's the members-only department of the Max Afterburner channel. We call it the Max Ready Room. You get access to members-only videos. So I'll see you over there on that members-only section, and then watch this next video that pops up right here. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, signing.